in my way. He was wearing his knockoff Armani sunglasses from Bimini, so I couldn't see those lovely blue eyes of his. I walked over to him, one hand always clasping some part of the boat to steady myself, and we shared a long, slow kiss, like young lovers. In that moment, and for a few hours after that, everything was just fine. Later that night, when the dark was setting in, the air felt a lot heavier than before, almost like the salt was condensing in it. A chill crept across the ocean and fog was starting to blow in, so I decided to return to the cabin after sitting with Frank for a couple of hours. He hadn't caught a thing all day. "Get me another beer, would you, honey?" he called to me as I left, dejection clearly weighing on his voice. I looked off the stern once more before heading into the cabin. The sea looked different at night. Not blue, but black, like shimmering tar or blood in the moonlight. My skin went cold at the thought of it. In the hushed darkness, every wave felt like it was reaching for me. But eager to cheer Frank up after such slim pickings, I popped another beer from the six-pack and went back out to give it to him. But he wasn't there. No, not at his seat or anywhere else. The breath left my body as I scrambled to look over the edges. Frank had always been a strong swimmer, and I knew he had more sense than to just jump in. It felt awful. It felt impossible. I checked every inch of that boat, inside the cabin and out. There were no lights in the distant darkness, so he couldn't have gotten onto another boat. His rods were undisturbed. I never even heard a splash. In those moments, all I could do was panic. My husband of 20 years was gone without a trace, vanished completely. Not a speck of blood, not a drop of blood. Of water, not a single thing was out of place. An empty beer can stood at attention beside his chair. My husband's disappearance or abduction hadn't disturbed it one bit. Frank was gone. After taking a second to stop hyperventilating, I realized that there'd be no hope of getting back to land without him, at least not at night. We'd been on smaller boats together before, and Frank had shown me the basics, but to make a boat move an inch is one thing. To sail it from there to a serviceable port at night is a totally different situation. There was no phone service, barely any internet, and I couldn't say with any kind of certainty where I even was. It had become a living nightmare, or at least I thought it had. At the time, I retreated to the cabin and locked the door behind me. I couldn't sleep hell, I could barely even breathe. But I had to wait for him or morning, whatever came first. I stayed like that, staring at shards of moonlight to the moon, for a few more hours. Suddenly, the boat seemed to tip almost sideways, and my mind flooded with horrible thoughts of capsizing. But we leveled out with a thud. Something had crawled onto the deck. Something big. My body tensed up, folding up in fear like human origami. I could hear heavy footsteps through the thin walls of the cabin, moving up, towards the bow. The moonlight shards were broken by something walking in front of the portholes outside. I caught an inch of khaki fabric as it passed. Frank. I darted up from the bed and unlocked the cabin door, bursting onto the deck. I followed Frank's wet footprints from the stern to the bow, calling him several times and being met with no response, until I saw him, staring off into the sea at the very tip of the boat. I could only see him from behind. My footsteps slowed as I got closer to him. Something was wrong. I could feel some inkling of ineffable dread tugging at me, telling me to run. Frank wasn't just soaked. He looked truly ragged, like he'd been gone for weeks. For weeks, tufts of hair were missing from the back of his head from what I could see. The baseball cap and the ugly knockoff shades were gone too. His whole body looked turgid with water, like a corpse that had been dredged from the sea. "Frank, are you okay?" I said, speaking no louder than a whisper. He was humming. It was the unmistakable tune of Beyond the Sea Again. The skin of his hands seemed pale, almost waxy, like the light didn't agree with them. The tips of his fingers looked ragged and fleshy. They were dripping with something dark. I had to choke back the urge to vomit when I realized something had torn me. Off his fingernails. Frank didn't seem to mind. "They took me," Frank suddenly hissed, and a voice, barely his own. It felt garbled, drowned like he was speaking from underwater. He was clutching his old fishing knife, and his trembling wet hand and stained with blood. It wasn't old blood either. It dripped in generous globs from the cold metal onto the deck. "Frank, I need you to calm down," I told him. His breathing felt like the roiling ocean, like a snake uncurling its belly. "I think you fell off the boat. Maybe you're a little shocked. Just come to bed. It'll all be fine. I couldn't fall," he said in his drowned voice. "They took me, didn't they? They shall show me their world." "Their world?" I asked, frightened. I was starting to cry. I'd always heard that we know more about space than we did about the deep ocean, but that still didn't count to Frank's ramblings. "Please, honey, you're scaring me. This needs to stop." "Shut up, woman," Frank barfed. It wasn't like him to be short like that. "But showing you the things, they showed me sweetness." "Yes," Frank said, as he began to turn indeed witnesses to their glorious kingdom. "Let me take him to the deep with me, darling." When I saw Frank's face, I screamed. "You could have probably heard it all the way back to Biscayne," Frank said, lifting up the knife. "I'm going to need your eyes." Frank's eye sockets were bleeding craters now, as though the eyes had just been plucked out. Black blood ran in rivulets down his scarred cheeks. His mouth dangled open as though his jaw had been snapped. Now, full of black blood where his tongue had been torn out from its root. His face was like a violent, ugly cartoon. "What do you mean?" Frank said his slack jaw never moved when he talked. But then again, it didn't seem as though his voice came from his mouth at all. That monstrous, cursed voice seemed to bleed like black blood from every pore. With that, I felt a surge of adrenaline and darted towards the cabin, while the thing that was once my husband, now this huge hulking gorilla of a man with his wide mouth and eyeless stare, lumbered quickly behind me. The boat trembled under his heavy footsteps as I bolted into the cabin and slammed the door behind me, locking it frantically as he approached. I collapsed onto the ground after that, aching and sobbing. "Come with me, darling, to their world. Come and see the delights they have in store for us." I saw the torture on his face and hands and skin. His body looked like a portrait of agony. I knew that the thing out there was not my husband. It couldn't be. It may have been wearing Frank's clothes. It might even have been wearing Frank. That was not Frank. Frank would have known instantly that his key to the cabin door was in the breast pocket of his jacket. And it's only a matter of time until whatever is wearing Frank figures that out too. Madison's sister lives far away. At night, when it's quiet, she can hear the ocean. Madison doesn't exactly know these things to be true, because no one admits that she has a sister. Still, it's more than just a feeling or a suspicion. It's like when there's an animal in the walls. The way she scratches and swishes and thumps leave you certain of it, even if it's a creature your eyes have never seen. Madison has never had an animal inside the walls of her home. Her sister has, though. She's been aware of her for as long as she can remember, but she's only lately come to understand who she is, her twin, her other half. Until now, she was more like a projector in Madison's head that showed her images of a cold and barren place, of mist rising off the white shore of a beach made purely of tiny shells. A trickster who would wake her up with a salty, fishy odour of a dock in her nose. It's a smell she had never experienced, but nevertheless recognizes. Lately, Madison can almost see her when she closes her eyes, when she's sleeping in her bed, curled on her side. She can smell her sister's hair from wherever she, too, is lying in her home somewhere far away. It's a rotted, algae smell, but it's as comforting to her as warm milk with nutmeg. Today, for the first time, she heard her sister's actual voice. Her words tumbled down, one by one, through her brain like this. "Your mom is not our mom, real mommy." Her voice can be hard to understand. Madison must concentrate on it very hard all the way to kindergarten. She can't stop thinking about these words until now. She's thought of her mummy as mommy and her daddy as daddy. She realizes, though, that her sister is right. This isn't her real mommy, only a woman. The woman's husband is only a man. She wants to ask her sister where their real mommy is, if her sister is with her. She doesn't know how to talk back to the voice, though. Madison has always known that she was adopted. "You weren't born from my belly, honey, but from the love in our hearts, and that makes you extra special." They have made her understand that she has a whole culture that doesn't belong to them, only to her. And they've bought her books of folk tales that are full of kids with faces like her own. She finds it strange then that they haven't told her about her sister. What are you thinking about? Though Maddie B, the woman asks Madison, looks to see her eyes watching her in the rearview mirror. My sister, she says she hasn't mentioned her before. You are. The woman says, her eyes crinkling for only a second before she forces them to look friendly again. Sister? You mean my sister, Aunt Julie? No, she says coldly, mine. She turns her face away and looks out her window. She isn't going to talk anymore if the woman is going to be a liar. At dinner, the man asks, "Why the long face, hun?" He shares a glance with the woman, and Madison knows they've been talking. Her sister's voice says, "Don't answer them," and so she doesn't. The man and woman both agree. Look at her, concerned. Is it because of that documentary we watched? The woman asks, her voice full of sugar. That show on PBS about the sisters who were adopted by two different families across the whole world from each other. Do you understand that just because that terrible thing happened to them doesn't mean it happened to you? Did that show make you sad, P? Says the man. Do you want to talk about it? I want to go to the ocean, Madison says, and throws down her fork. No matter what they try to say to her for the rest of dinner, this is her only answer. At bedtime, the woman is late coming to tuck her in. Madison lays in her bed curiously listening to her thump around the attic. When the woman finally comes into her room, her hair is messy and has a long dusty cobweb clinging to it. Madison doesn't point this out. The woman has something in her hand. I didn't mean to take so long, the woman says. But look what I found. She presents Madison with the object in her hand. It's a ceramic dolphin. The dolphin is leaping as if out of the water. The ceramic water is sparkly and blue and allows the dolphin to swim. This was mine when I was a little girl. I remembered how much I used to love it tonight when you talked about going to the ocean. She sits down on the bed. It's winter, you know. It's too cold to go to the ocean now. We can talk about going in the summer though, when it's warm and sunny and Daddy has some time off work. Would